There's these little Allen grub screw, type Allen keys, grub screw Allen keys. Now at some point I might buy a router table or build a proper one, but for now we simply need to make something that's going to get the job done. Now I've made up lots of temporary bodge job type router tables in the past by simply screwing a router to the underside of a piece of MDF or plywood, and it can get the job done, but where we've got all these repetitive cuts which need to be quite accurate, I thought it was well worth taking half a day or so to make us something that's going to last a little bit longer and that we can rely on. Now it's well worth saying at this point that there are better options than construction grade plywood, but this is what I had, and it was quite a flat, smooth piece, and it just needed a little bit of refining. In hindsight, if I'd had a piece of laminate kitchen worktop or something along those lines, which is very smooth, flat, man-made and standardized, then that's probably an even better way to go. So nothing much to this apart from the fact that it's a super rigid flat surface now. I was almost tempted to buy one. There are some fairly decent cost-effective ways to go, but I had a bit of plywood that was super flat and straight. I've then put a subframe there to hold it nice and rigid, and I'm hoping that this is another one of those things that we can clamp up in those super jaws and use it on a temporary basis like that. Now in order to get this mounted underneath and allow the bit to stand up the correct amount, I could just recess a section out here and screw our router up into this plywood. Not ideal, and it also means that taking it in and out isn't particularly easy. Therefore, all being well, this is the correct parcel that's just arrived. So as you can see, a bit of a size difference. The idea is one of these has got to go back. First one is a router table insert, which is aluminium. The other one is a 9mm plastic of some sort. Now the likelihood is neither of these are going to receive our router straight out the box, so we're going to have to drill the holes. This one was £20 or 22 or 23, but it's a nice solid aluminium table. I mean that's a pretty nicely engineered piece of kit. I can actually leave this on the plunge router for the odd time that I need to use it for something else. So that's option one, which I'm biased towards slightly, I think. But what I think is actually going to decide it for me is if one of these happen to fit straight out of the box. Right, now I've come up with a couple more problems. I was intending to drop it in to a pre-machined rebate in the plywood, but of course I can't do that because the router wouldn't be able to fit through. It did suddenly look like the smaller 1/4 inch router might have been the perfect size, but again, this is just too close to actually be usable because the holes would have to be only offset from the factory ones by 3 or 4 mil. I think I prefer the aluminium one, but I think I'm going to go with this one. They make it difficult for you. Not sure if you can make out the light coming through. That isn't particularly clever. That said, when we get to the center, which is probably the more important bit, there's no problem there at all. So that's got to come out. That retains its where it is, but we need to set the router to the thickness of this. Now it made more sense to do the routed section before I cut out the centre. That way I had full support both sides of the router base. I strapped on a straight edge with a clamp, and that worked pretty well. Then I just did a plunge cut on a circular saw just to cut out the waste, which would be the section that the router actually slotted in. It wasn't quite sitting flush enough, so I think it's better to go a millimetre or two under. And in retrospect, I found out that there's adjustment screws which allow you to level it out, so it's better to go a little bit over. So I took a little bit more off with the router. Right, how are we doing? This is fitting nice and flush now on the inside, but I realised that there's these little Allen grub screw Allen keys in the corner, which correspond with these magnets I'm going to set in now, and then that means you can finally adjust each corner. Right, so far so good. Still haven't done any work towards our doors, I know. Right, I'm just trying to mark up the router, which is not particularly easy. What does make it a little bit easier is all these concentric circles. You can line that up if you've got the round base on your router. Alright, let's do away with the router. Actually, what we want is this plate I've taken off the bottom. We can use those holes. I used a chalkboard marker to mark onto the plastic, which worked well. Then I had to drill all the way through. That was with a 4mm bit. That gave us the clearance for the actual screws, but the screws were so short from that old plate, and they're the only ones I had. I really had to countersink them in well beyond what I wanted to. So it was about halfway through the plastic or more, which just allowed them to bite into the router itself safely and get all the fixings in that I could. I got to this point and I figured I needed to make something that was going to be reliable when it came to a fence. So again, into the scrap pile, picked out some 18mm MDF, and yes, I can paint it and seal it in the future, but for now I made a simple L shape which I know will hold square and true, and then I reinforced that just with some blocks in the back which will hold the right angle. Well, it's been another one of those days where I've spent more time preparing to do what I was meant to do than doing it. I haven't actually started any of this, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to hold on for another video. But what was meant to be a very, very temporary rig up of a router table has turned out to be something that might actually last us a couple of years. A couple of things I've done. One is just put this box on the back. This was a spare adapter I had, so I should be able to hook it up to the much more powerful vacuum, but that is the fence. I'm just going to use clamps or even just screw it in. No need for T-tracks or anything, but we should be ready to start on the timber and the joinery tomorrow now. And it might be that if we're using a much smaller bit, we can close that up. So I've only screwed this piece in. Now our budget-ish router table insert needed a little bit of modification. Now the screws, the only screws I had are what was in the router base already holding that plastic trim on. I mean, yes, they'll fill up with sawdust, but you know, at least they're flush. There's nothing stopping it. These have adjusted nicely, so again, we're pretty flat all the way across. But I guess I can't not fire it up and at least try one piece through, and then we'll get onto the production side in the next video. Right, that's all I'm going to do, and we'll save the rest for tomorrow. A little 18mm bit of poplar, which is exactly what I've used for all the frames for all of our shaker doors for tomorrow. So a little bit more work than expected, but hopefully worth it in the end. Test cuts came out great, and now we're on to full-on production tomorrow. Now remember, I'm releasing these videos every day this week. 4 different methods to make shaker doors. It's been a great learning experience, and I've made plenty of mistakes along the way, I'm sure, and I'm sure people will tell me about that. But hopefully you enjoy this series as the videos are released. Before I go, I want to say a special thank you to those that are scrolling across your screen right now, and to all the others on the different levels over on Patreon. Info and a link down in the description. But that's it for this one. Thank you for watching. Remember, if you can, do it yourself, and we'll see you tomorrow.